So I would like to start off with a couple of slides just to sum up the project and remind everyone what it's about. So the aim of the project is to identify and catalyse pathways and opportunities to reduce the impact of plastic pollution in cities in the global south. And we're going to be doing that by focusing on 2 case study sites, Makuru, which is an informal settlement in Nairobi, Kenya, and Sylhet, a city, the second city in Bangladesh. We'll be using participatory arts-based methodologies to map what the current practices are around plastic waste, how it's disposed of. We want to raise awareness about the impact of plastic pollution, explore attitudes and perceptions around plastic waste and potential solutions, co-design potential solutions, and if possible, do a couple of small pilots of potential solutions too. At the end of the project, we'll share our findings in the South-South workshop, develop policy change mechanisms such as policy briefing notes, and pursue further funding to really take action and implement the project findings. So as I mentioned, this is the first of our knowledge exchange seminars. You can see here what the other 3 seminars are going to cover. I won't bother to read them out, but we very much hope that you'll be able to join us for the other sessions. These are our partners on the project. We've got an amazing team of people who are doing really, really interesting and important work in Kenya and in Bangladesh. So we thought we'd start off by showing, it's about 3.5 minutes long. It's a video that's been produced by the MacArthur Foundation, which kind of gives an overview of the circular economy.
A few billion years, and it will be around for many more. In the living world, there's no landfill. Instead, materials flow. One species' waste is another's food. Energy is provided by the sun. Things grow, then die, and nutrients return to the soil safely. And it works. Yet as humans, we've adopted a linear approach. We take, we make, and we dispose. A new phone comes out, so we ditch the old one. Our washing machine packs up, so we buy another. Each time we do this, we're eating into a finite supply of resources and often producing toxic waste. It simply can't work long term. So what can? If we accept that the living world's cyclical model works, can we change our way of thinking so that we too operate a circular economy? Let's start with the biological cycle. How can our waste build capital rather than reduce it? By rethinking and redesigning products and components and the packaging they come in, we can create safe and compostable materials that help grow more stuff. As they say in the movies, no resources have been lost in the making of this material. So what about the washing machines, mobile phones, fridges? We know they don't biodegrade. Here, we're talking about another sort of rethink, a way to cycle valuable metals, polymers, and alloys so they maintain their quality and continue to be useful beyond the shelf life of individual products. What if the goods of today became the resources of tomorrow? It makes commercial sense. Instead of the throw away and replace culture we've become used to, we'd adopt a return and renew one, where products and components are designed to be disassembled and regenerated. One solution may be to rethink the way we view ownership. What if we never actually owned our technologies? We simply licensed them from the manufacturers. Now, let's put these 2 cycles together. Imagine if we could design products to come back to their makers, their technical materials being reused and their biological parts increasing agricultural value. And imagine that these products are made and transported using renewable energy. Here we have a model that builds prosperity long term. And the good news is, There are already companies out there who are beginning to adopt this way of working. But the circular economy isn't about one manufacturer changing one product. It's about all the interconnecting companies that form our infrastructure and economy coming together. It's about energy. It's about rethinking the operating system itself. We have a fantastic opportunity to open new perspectives and new horizons. Instead of remaining trapped in the frustrations of the present, with creativity and innovation, we really can rethink and redesign our future.
Okay, so let's welcome the first of our speakers, Professor Steve Fletcher, who is Professor of Ocean Policy and Economy and Director of the Revolution Plastics Initiative at the University of Portsmouth. And Steve's going to be talking about the circular economy and the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you very much, Cressida. Thank you very much, Saida, and good morning, everybody. I'm just in the process, here we go, trying to share my screen. It's not doing. Okay, can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. All right, thank you. So yeah, so good morning, everybody in the UK, and good afternoon and good evening to people in other parts of the world, in Africa and in Bangladesh. My presentation is really an introduction to the relationship between the Sustainable Development Goals and the circular economy. Now, I thought I'd start off with a nice picture of Portsmouth for those of you that may not have been to Portsmouth or know anything about Portsmouth. And I really like this picture because it shows that Portsmouth in some ways is quite a green and open city surrounded by the sea, surrounded by water. It's one of the UK's only island cities. And as such, it has a sort of unique set of challenges and opportunities that goes with it. But rather than talk about that, I'll talk about the Sustainable Development Goals and the circular economy. So I think the first thing to say, building on the video that we've just watched, is just to talk for a moment about the circular economy and what it is. So the video was very nice and it talked about a linear economy. And in this diagram on the screen, the linear economy is the grey dotted line that goes around the outside. It's where resources are extracted from the earth in some way. Then a product is produced in some way. If you follow the dotted line around, then the product or the thing is used in some way by a company or an individual. And then at the end of its life, it's disposed of in some way, which might be into landfill, or it might be incineration, or it might be lost into nature somehow as pollution. But the circular economy really questions that approach and advocates a different way of working. So if I just ask you to focus on the extraction part of the circular economy at the top left of the slide, the first thing is probably actually one of the most important aspects of the circular economy, which is to reduce the amount of resources used in a product by design. So instead of using 2 kilos of plastic or 2 kilos of metal, let's try just using 1 kilo or half a kilo. So it's just actually using less in the design of the product in the first place. So it's reducing by design. It really places product design at the heart of the circular economy. And then if you follow the orange line around, what we see is that the product is still made in the same way. And then the orange line goes around the corner to the use part of the circular economy. So the product still goes to people or businesses to use in the same way. But this is where things then change. So once the product has been used, there are a variety of options to keep the materials in that resource, or in that product, sorry, in the economy. So we could simply reuse the product. So instead of buying a new mobile phone, we reuse it. We could repair the product, we could refurbish it, We could break down its components and remanufacture a new product from it. The key thing being that we keep those components in the economy. They're not exiting the economy into some form of waste disposal process. But there will be some things that we can't reuse, or we can't repair or refurbish or remanufacture. So those still have an end of life element to them as a product. In that case, what we could do is repurpose the components of that product. So something, a component that might be in, I don't know, a mobile phone, we could put into something else, maybe the computer chips in a washing machine or something like that. But we repurpose the resources that are in a product that is at the end of its life. Or, excuse me, or we could recycle it. We could recycle the metal that's in the product. We could use a variety of approaches to recycle plastics, for example, in the product. Again, the idea being that those materials go back into the production stage of the economy. So instead of having a linear or a straight line economy from extraction to production to use and to end of life, we create an economy that loops, that is circular, in that we ultimately are seeking to have an economy that never generates waste. So we design products so that they can be reused, repaired, refurbished, remanufactured, or if we can't do that to the product itself, to make sure that the product is able to be repurposed or recycled. And clearly that requires a high degree of systemic change within the economy, as the video indicated, but also thinking about how we make products in the first place. So it really requires all stages of the life cycle to be considered. So in essence, what it does is challenges the current economic model and encourages us to think about the sort of future we want, the sort of sustainable future that would be appealing both for cities and for countries and for the whole world. So the slide here just talks about some of the advantages of a circular economy. So it keeps materials at their highest possible value. The interventions require us to think about the entire value chain of a product. It includes all stakeholders, so those who are extracting the materials from the ground, those who are making products, those who are using products, and those who are disposing of products. So it's a societal scale series of questions and actions. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, it's about disconnecting economic growth from environmental impact. So this is really important. I think historically, economic growth has been tied to damaging the ecosystems. Hence, we now have climate change, biodiversity loss, polluted oceans, and so on, because growth is connected to environmental damage. What we're trying to do is disconnect or decouple economic growth from environmental, economic growth from environmental damage. So to separate those two things out. So this then brings us to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I imagine most of you are familiar, at least with the idea of Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the 17 goals that the world pretty much has signed up to move us to a sustainable future. Most of the goals have a target date of 2030, and they really shouldn't be seen as separate or fragmented goals or objectives. They really should be seen as a connected group of ambitions that the world seeks to achieve. And in achieving those things, we expect the world to transition to a more sustainable footing. And I guess you might normally have seen these goals as a sort of series of squares that are lined up next to each other. This diagram presents them a slightly different way. It's really designed to identify the relationship between them. So in brief, what we see at the bottom of the screen there are the goals that are very much about protecting the biosphere, the living components of the world. And they are the goals around ocean conservation, around land conservation, climate, and clean water. And those are the basic building blocks of a healthy ecosystem. Those healthy ecosystem building blocks then support a well-functioning society. And those functions could relate to things like peace and security, sustainable cities, zero hunger, reducing poverty, promoting gender equality, those sorts of things. And if we have a good and well-functioning society, then we can really have a strong economy as well. And the goals focused around economy are kind of the top of the pyramid, if you like. And the vertical column that's joining all of those goals together is partnerships and working together. So it's really illustrating that the Sustainable Development Goals are about transformative change, just like the circular economy is about transformative change. And what I'd just like to focus on just for the last couple of minutes of my talk is Sustainable Development Goal number 12, which is responsible consumption and production. So that's up at the top there in the economy circle of the diagram. So responsible consumption and production underlies and underpins a lot of the other Sustainable Development Goals. And actually, this is true for all of the goals. If you make progress in addressing any one of the goals, it has kind of tentacles that reach out and affect some of the other goals as well. But sustainable consumption and production, because of its core importance around how we make and use products and the world's resources, it has more connections than most. So if we make big steps to tackle responsible consumption and production through transitioning to a circular economy, then we will achieve far more of the Sustainable Development Goals than if we don't. And so what we're looking to do really is build resource efficiency, so make our use of the world's resources more efficient. We're looking to reduce environmental impact, and we're looking to increase human well-being through responsible consumption and production. And what you can see on the slide there are just some of the connections that are made through improving our responsible consumption and production. So it helps us generate affordable and clean energy. It helps us build sustainable cities and communities. It helps us with pollution, so we have cleaner water, better sanitation. It helps us tackle climate action because we're not generating some of the negative side effects of using the world's resources too quickly. It promotes decent work and economic growth because responsible consumption and production will generate new jobs. It's in the clean tech, the green tech sector that will really boost economic activity without risking planetary health. It helps us be more healthy as well, so good health and well-being, less pollution, cleaner water and so on, and promotes gender equality too by democratizing how we generate, use and dispose of products. So in essence, the transition to a circular economy fundamentally helps us achieve all of the Sustainable Development Goals, primarily through tackling responsible consumption and production. And my final slide is really perhaps a bit more reflective. And what difference might moving to a circular economy make in terms of our overall approach to development and economic impact and economic growth. So I suppose the thing to note is that, but almost by definition, the circular economy must be inclusive. So it must be inclusive of the global north and the global south, of the rich and the poor, every stage of the life cycle, and all of the Sustainable Development Goals. So what we're moving from is a winner versus loser situation, more towards a win-win situation, ideally, because we're retaining value in the economy and we're reducing the environmental externalities, the pollution and excessive use of resources that is generated by the linear economy. And as such, that helps us tackle the climate crisis. It helps us tackle human health or improve human health. It helps generate good and new jobs, and it helps ecosystems maintain a healthy footing. And perhaps more fundamentally, it's about supporting the reduction of inequality at the global scale. So my final message, and this is my last slide, but my final message essentially is that if we are interested in moving towards delivering the Sustainable Development Goals, then the transition to a circular economy is fundamental to that shift. And that is recognised in all of the major intergovernmental organisations, and even big multi-country blocs like the European Union, but others as well, now have strategies to transition their economies to a circular economy. So this isn't just an idea, this is something that's being implemented and planned, and the change really being actioned. So thank you, Saida. I shall leave it there and hand back to Cressida, I think. So Cressida, thank you, back to you.
Thanks, Steve. We've got time for a couple of questions. If anyone's got a couple of questions, post them in the chat box, please. Otherwise, we can move on to Matthew and interrogate Steve a bit later on. So Dr. Matthew Anderson is Senior Lecturer in Business Ethics at the University of Portsmouth, and does a lot of work around circular business models. And Matthew's going to talk to us about that now.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and hear me. I've unmuted myself. Yep. So yeah, what I want to do this morning or this evening for some of you is just to reflect a bit on my kind of current research and also look for sort of connections and potential opportunities with this current project. So what I'm trying to do here is kind of focus on the scale of business and particularly social enterprises. So really reflecting on what can circular economy principles offer for social enterprises, so smaller scale business organisations. In terms of the research context, so a lot of the research that I do is with fair trade organisations. So in 2019, the World Fair Trade Organisation made a commitment to combine fair trade with circular economy approaches. And we've seen WFTO members start to really sort of take up that challenge. So there's an example here of Lifafa, based in Delhi, and they transform waste plastic into handbags, wallets, jackets, so relatively high value fashion accessories. The World Fair Trade Organisation is made up of over 300 fair trade enterprises across the global south. And then at a policy level, we're seeing some interesting work happening in Europe. So the Fair Trade Advocacy Office, along with Circulareconomy and the European Environmental Bureau, published just last month a report looking at circular and fair business models. So looking at how circular economy and fair trade models can align, and also potentially some of those challenges, the areas that they describe as some of the potential blind spots. So perhaps we can reflect on some of those challenges that need to be considered as well. So in terms of some of the questions that I'm sort of been looking at, I'm not going to try and answer all of these today, but I think these are some really interesting questions. So just to think about what social enterprises are currently doing in terms of engaging with circular economy. I think there's a lot of work on kind of upcycling, but do we see other forms of circular economy being developed in businesses? What are some of the things which are driving change, and what are the barriers? Again, this might be down to business models or policy engagements. I want to look briefly at how we can measure circularity. What are some of the tools which are being developed? And then also this question about perhaps the unintended consequences. So what might this mean for some of the producers in supply chains? So if we're thinking about fashion, it's cotton farmers, but if we're thinking in other sectors, what about those involved in mining or manufacture? How do you align that with more circular models? So I think there's at least three things, possibly more than three, but I'll focus on three things that I think circular economy can offer. And I think this goes beyond resource efficiency. So Steve, I think talked about some of these areas of kind of strategic transitions, and circular economy has been really beneficial in terms of raising that public awareness of sustainability challenges, particularly around plastics, fashion, and food waste. And we're seeing government engagement across many countries. So I've kind of named two areas here, but we could look much more wider than that, and also include UN programs as well. So public engagement has been really beneficial. I guess at a bit more of a conceptual level, circular economy also offers some new ways of thinking about supply chains. So thinking more in terms of systems, and also just the power of images. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has their butterfly diagram to explain circular economy. So how you explain these really quite complex ideas using the power of images, I think, is interesting. And actually for businesses, perhaps helps identify kind of new value within supply chains that they hadn't previously developed. And then the third thing, which I think is driving quite a lot of circular economy development, is digital innovation. So a range of online platforms that present new opportunities for social enterprises in a globally connected world. And also open up opportunities for increased transparency and increased accountability. So we saw some interesting things recently in Bangladesh with trade unions making use of that factory information that brands now make available. So as part of disputes between workers and factories, they were actually able to post the factory lists of brands that they were manufacturing for. And I think that's an interesting change in kind of dynamics and how data is used. So quite a lot of my work on circular economy has looked at the fashion sector. So I just want to introduce one brief case study in this sector. So these quotes come from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's work on a new textiles economy. So the idea is that a circular approach to production, and this applies beyond fashion, but here we're looking at fashion, would allow value to circulate. And this would mean that all workers could be paid well and good working conditions would be provided. I think there's still some questions about how that is put into action, how that's guaranteed, what's that kind of theory of change that underpins those ideas. But there's also a recognition that, that there could be some losers within this transition. So there could potentially be some unintended consequences where certain activities we see a reduction in revenue. So the production of virgin materials. So here, cotton production, and in other sectors, we could think of other areas of production. So I think, as well as seeing circular economy as a positive approach, perhaps we shouldn't take it too simplistically as a straightforward sort of win-win. So we do need to think about how this value is going to be circulated and also how it's going to be redistributed. So these things may not happen automatically unless there's some kind of structures in place to allow that to happen. And I think there's increasing recognition that this is the case. So there's an article published by Alan Murray and colleagues back in 2017 saying that circular economy is virtually silent on the social dimension, so the impact on workers. I don't think that's the case anymore, but it's still an area that needs work. And I'll come back to that on my final slide. Let's move briefly then to a case. So this is a company close to us in Portsmouth, based on the Isle of Wight. So a short ferry ride across the Solent. They're a really interesting company. So started 10 years ago by two brothers who were in their 20s at the time. Recently, they've been awarded the Queen's Award for Innovation for their use of technology to promote sustainability. What they've managed to develop is a circular economy approach to producing clothes. And I think the way that they use these principles throughout their international supply chain is really interesting. So this is a diagram of how they apply circular economy principles at each stage of their business. And their business is, as I said, globally connected. So the cotton is produced in Gujarat in northern India, so organic cotton production, and the waste products go back into the soil to regenerate the soil. T-shirts are produced in a factory in Tamil Nadu in southern India, and the factory uses renewable technology and has a closed loop system of water in the factory. When the T-shirts then come to the UK, that their factory is powered by Raspberry Pis, so these little computer platforms, and they teach their staff to code. So it's an automated factory, again, run on renewable energy. But in terms of that final stage of circular economy, at the end of a product's life, consumers can return those T-shirts to T-Mail, and they get a £5 credit. Those T-shirts are then shredded, made into yarn again, and then sent back to the factories in India to be made into new T-shirts. And I think this is one of the parts that's interesting about their model, is that actually, rather than kind of undermining that connection with producers in the global south, they're probably more closely connected, because they have to work with a factory that is prepared to use their waste product to produce new T-shirts. And the factory has to run their machines slower using this yarn, because it's not as strong as new yarn. So that relationship, almost a form of kind of industrial symbiosis, but over a global scale, I think is interesting. The other thing it means is that they have to use organic cotton because of the strength of the fibers is greater in organic cotton. So again, we're seeing kind of value creation at different stages of the supply chain. So I think it's a really interesting case. In terms of plastic, that they minimize plastic throughout their supply chain. So they don't use any plastic packaging. It's packaged in recycled paper. I'm wearing one of their shirts. They don't have plastic buttons. They use cork fiber to produce their buttons. So yeah, I think it's an interesting case in many areas, and I'm hoping we can apply some of these principles to the work that we do. The last stage that I want to, or the last topic, sorry, that I want to just consider briefly is around measurements. So we're seeing increasing numbers of indicators to measure circular economy. And this is a review just published a couple of weeks ago in Journal of Cleaner Production. And it identified 61 indicators to measure circular economy. So they looked at the 3 dimensions of sustainability: environmental, economic and social, And they focus just on 3 R's of circular economy principles: reduce, reuse, and recycle. And so we can see that the numbers are the indicators that they identify in their papers. And we can start to see sort of clusters. So there are significant numbers of measures that look at reduce, reuse, and recycle, and also look at environmental, economic, and social. But the other thing we see, though, is that actually certain dimensions have had more focus. So in terms of the 3 R's, recycling is better developed than the other 2. And in terms of sustainability, we've seen a greater focus on the environment and the economy. So the social dimension, although not absent, is still underdeveloped. And this really brings me to my last point. Working with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we know that their Circulytics tool is really useful to allow businesses to measure their level of engagement with circular economy. And there's an ambition to include the Sustainable Development Goals within that. So I think this is a real opportunity, but there's still some quite big questions about how that social dimension is included. So what indicators will be included and why? So I think there's some work to be done on what's sometimes called the kind of the theory of change. And I think this is likely to include a number of things. So ideas around stakeholder capitalism, around just transition, and donut economics. And this final slide here I've got just draws on some work over several years on fair trade. So looking at measures of social impact, we've got some ideas here in terms of sort of best practice. So if we're looking to measure the social impact of circular economy from a research perspective, these are some of the things that we need to be considering. So the context, the case selection, the unit of analysis, and these kind of bigger questions of how change happens. And I think we've got an upcoming workshop that looks more at sort of methods and tools. So perhaps we can have that conversation as part of that workshop as well. Okay, I think I've used up my 15 minutes. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. I think maybe we should move on to Dipesh's talk now, because your talk segues very nicely into Dipesh's talk. So can I please introduce Dipesh Pabari from Koale Plastics Plus Collectors. And he is running a community-based initiative that he's going to talk to us about now.
Thanks, Cressida. Good afternoon. Let me try and figure out how to share. Can you all see that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Right, thanks for the introduction. My name's Dipesh and I'm based in Kenya. This is my home country. I'm currently living on the south coast of Kenya in a very beautiful area called Diani Beach. The picture you see is from our waste depot, and I'm quite proud of that little wall in the background over there. That's entirely made of glass bottles on our 3-acre waste depot, which I'll tell you more about. So I think by the time we finish it, it should be about 400-meter long periphery wall, probably Kenya's longest wall made out of glass bottles. Where are we based? So just to give you a little bit of a context to where we are on that beautiful beach over there, that is increasingly not as beautiful as it once was with the amount of waste we're picking up. Just to sort of put things again into context, we've recently finished a 3-month-long participation in the International Coastal Cleanup, and we've removed in excess of 50 tons so far of waste from our beach fronts, which is about a stretch of 150 kilometers, and it's still coming in. So current thinking was always that Kenya and our Indian Ocean coastline, the East African coastline, was predominantly a recipient of waste coming from other countries as far as Asia and the Middle East. A recent study just conducted and published last month, doing some extensive work on the coastline and the sort of macroplastics that were being picked up, showed that about 88% of the waste being picked was actually locally produced, which shows you that we're rapidly increasing on our on our consumption in East Africa, despite all the efforts that are being made by the government and people. And I think that's just generally the trend around the world, that, you know, whilst we continue to work very hard towards reducing, recycling, and ultimately banning, we're still dramatically increasing. Our work. So Quale Plastic Plus is the social enterprise arm of the Flip-Floppy project, which is something that myself and a few others founded a few years ago. We built the world's first recycled plastic sailing dhow that you can see in that picture over there. It's quite colorful because it's actually covered in about 30,000 flip-flops collected from the oceans. But the actual boat itself, everything from the keel, the ribs, was fabricated out of predominantly HDPE and a lot of LDPE, and reconstituted into different parts of the boat. While we were building it, I think most people thought we were crazy and it wasn't possible. So funding was a big problem. So we were determined to prove that it was possible. So we found ways to finance it ourselves. We successfully sailed that dhow, which is 9 meters long, and weighs just over 7 tons, along the whole coastline of Kenya, about 500 kilometers from Lamu to Zanzibar, about a year ago. Why did we do this? We wanted to create a positive symbol that ultimately shows that single-use plastic does not make sense. And we wanted it to be locally embedded in the heritage of Kenya, hence it was a dhow. And ultimately to really showcase to the world that, you know, if you can build a boat that is seaworthy, essentially out of old toothbrushes, it just shows you how valuable a product this is. It did its work. It created enough momentum around the East African coastline to be noted down in several sort of media publications as Africa's Blue Planet moment. Again, what we were also trying to demonstrate is that we can do something quite sophisticated in a very low-tech environment. So the machinery that we used, you'd be surprised that it was able to produce anything. And it was a lot of hard work and a lot of success and failure, but ultimately we did it. Tied to that is the work that we continue to support through the social enterprise arms of the Flip-Floppy, and the Quale Plastic Plus, which I'm talking about today, is one of the social enterprise arms, and probably definitely our most elaborate and most mature sort of project. So the whole rationale for us is we advocate for an end of single-use plastics, and this is something we campaign through the Flip-Floppy project. And by that I mean, if it cannot be recycled or upcycled to an item with equal integrity, then it shouldn't exist. So, but we still have existing waste in the system that we have to deal with. So the Flip-Floppy continues to campaign and push for legislation within East Africa towards ending specific single-use plastic items. We have a very strong sort of legislative and advocacy program that we push. And then through our innovative hubs, the Quale Plastic being one of them, where we are trying to establish a closed loop economy within a small upcoming urban area, which has a total population of about 1 million people spread across the south coast of Kenya. So we have a full team of people, and currently there are about 15 waste collectors and waste segregators employed on a daily basis, and I'll tell you more about that as well. The rest of the project, the management team of the Flip-Floppy and Quale Plastics, is up to date, currently doing this entirely on a volunteer basis. We're in this for the long haul, and we recognize that we have to invest our time and, you know, whatever funding we get into the operations of it to get it right. And key to getting that right over here is understanding the feedstock and the waste disposal. So classically, like anywhere around the world, waste ends up in the wrong places. What we've done is we've created free-to-use waste segregation bins across a 20-kilometer stretch in Diani Beach, and that might not sound very innovative for the UK, but I'm sure, you know, for places like in Bangladesh and Kenya, the concept of a free-to-use waste segregation bin is an innovation in itself. So getting that model correct is essential, and it doesn't always work, which I'll tell you about as well. In the initial stages, it was really welcomed by the hotel industry, and you know, Diani Beach is one of the biggest tourism hotspots in Kenya. It's been voted year after year as the sort of top 5 beaches in the world. And fortunately, there's a lot of responsible tourism here as well. It's rather than the sort of classic Majorca scene where, you know, you've got tens of thousands of people huddled on a beach getting very red when they shouldn't be, and big sort of chain hotels. It's fairly small scale as well, which is one of the beauties of Diani. So the residents of Diani really got behind, because there isn't much of an infrastructure provided by the county government in this area and most parts around Kenya. And by that, I mean they were willing to support the payment of these waste collection bins, the collectors themselves and the segregation itself and the rest of it. COVID happened and the entire hotel industry closed down, and we lost our bedrock of basic income that we required to continue on this. So it pushed us into sort of a lot of crowdfunding, et cetera, to keep things going. How do I change this slide? There we go. So I'm sort of just tying in and sort of weaving the story of Quality Plastics just as a case study today to really present what's happening on the ground itself. We have a little tuk-tuk that goes around collecting the waste from the waste bins, and then we take it to our waste depot where it's further sorted and segregated and prepared for either for sale to recyclers, but the plastics themselves we are stockpiling with the ultimate aim of being able to establish a recycling factory within the locality as well. So it doesn't work all the time. That's your classic scene over here. And you know, when you start doing things on an economic basis, and if you were saying my ultimate goal is to set up a recycling factory, a classic situation, as you know, many of you know, will be to exploit the rampant poverty that exists in places like Kenya and utilize that population for cheap plastic and waste picking, which is happening all around the world. We are not simply looking at this from a commercial enterprise. And the whole idea was to instill responsible waste management behaviors within a community that we can then scale up across the world. It's a lot of hard work. And more often than not, despite providing bins to people who have zero access to waste collection and waste disposal, it often looks like that. Same with these other sort of apartments springing up left, right, and center. Rather than taking their waste 50 meters away from their apartment block, if not less, they choose to sort of just throw it on the side. So these are some of the ongoing challenges that we have and we continue to work with and pull out our hair about. At the depot, which was the first slide I showed you with that long, beautiful wall made out of glass bottles, whilst we're providing waste segregation bins with plastics and metals and paper and the rest of it, often it still comes in a mixed form and looks like that muck that you see in the picture over there, which again then requires us to further sort it and segregate it out. And it's the most unpleasant, inhumane job, and we've sort of cut the line on just how deep we're going to dig into that before we sort of really write it off. Bottom line is, though, if it wasn't ending up at this waste depot, it would be ending up in a landfill or worse, back into the waterways as well. So it's allowed us, and this has been critical to the success, I believe, of this small social enterprise, is to have a holding facility to sort and segregate. You know, reflecting back on some of the earlier presentations about design, that picture of the lady sort of separating out the bottles, your classic problem, you know, with design. And this is stuff that we desperately need to address. And we try to address this more through the Flip Floppy project. And, you know, we're in discussions right now with, you know, part of the Ellen MacArthur movement on the plastic packs. One is starting off in Kenya. Your typical PET bottle is made up of 4 different items and 3 different plastics. More often than not, the bottles in Kenya come with a label, and they come, of course, with a lid made of HDPE and that terrible ring that closes off the bottle. I suspect anyone with a little bit of time would be able to redesign that very quickly and sort out millions of tons worth of problem for everybody else. We've tried to do a little bit of economics on it to see if it is actually cost effective to remove labels. From the data right now, it's not, but the value of a PET bottle for resale, unless these things are separated out, is extremely low. So we're stuck between a hard and you know, a rock and a hard place at the moment with the PET that we're stockpiling. The demand for PET in Kenya is significant, which is also causing interesting problems and another whole set of problems within the waste collectors and the informal waste collection as it is in the moment, because everyone, the middlemen are willing to pay a lot more for PET and not interested in the rest of it. So what we're witnessing across the country is the informal sector just focusing on the PET, which means you've still got this whole other problem existing. And as those of you who know, I think part of that demand is driven very much for yarn for cheap clothing, which I don't believe solves the problem either. We're essentially downcycling and creating an even bigger problem for the ecosystems and the waterways. So problems are there. We've worked very hard to get where we are. Just move this so I can reflect on that. To date, we've managed to get 30 waste segregation bins, and we're growing stronger. And of that, actually, and I really want to highlight this because it's fairly unknown in this part of the world when your county government sort of comes behind you and backs your project, even if it's on such a small amount. They actually finance 10 more green stations in there. What was key as well is to the success and to getting it right from the beginning, and why it's taken so much longer, is to be able to sign the right agreements with the county government. Despite all the issues, it is absolutely critical to have these relationships with the existing government. And you know, it may simply result in a small token gesture, like a few green stations being financed by them, but it also has resulted in the being able to not have to go through the intense bureaucracy of licensing. They've supported that as well. And what's particularly exciting about Diani, and why I believe we can get this right, is that they've just created a new municipality, and they are looking to build proper systems from waste management and within the actual municipality. So we have a golden opportunity to start from scratch and do it properly from the beginning. Another sort of case study of success to show that, you know, things, you know, despite the increased amount of waste that is coming out over there, there are systems that are being put in place in Kenya. Recently, there has been pushes towards the extended producer responsibility programs, which has been gazetted by the Kenyan government. The nuts and bolts of it are still being haggled between the manufacturers and the government. But we've immediately witnessed certain companies coming forward and saying, how can you help us collect our waste and pay, and we will pay for it. So we've signed our first EPR take back scheme, which is a big step forward in many ways. We provide employment for about 15 people full time. And, you know, through various sort of moments as well, we've been able to scale up to about 40 to 50 people employed. Long-term goals is to indeed have a sustainable city and country waste management system based on a circular economy suitable for this particular region in Kenya. And by that, we also need to have a recycling factory established to ensure that we are doing things as localized as possible and reducing our own carbon footprint. So we're working slowly towards getting the foundation of this correct and building up towards attracting more investors over time into the bigger story. One of the keys that we're also trying to develop, as you know, in terms of sort of looking at innovations and how we can improve our waste collection, is some form of a trash for cash redemption app, where individuals and collectors can bring in their waste over certain days and immediately weigh them, and they would get sort of tokens through Kenya's very sophisticated phone-to-phone cash transfer systems, which makes life so much easier. We're intending to expand our collection stations further beyond Diani Beach and across the whole sort of 200-kilometer stretch on the south coast. And then eventually establish this recycling mini factory over here, where we will be piloting products that we believe have a ready market. That photo over there is actually a 6-meter plank of wood, plastic lumber wood, that we built for the flip-floppy dhow. And you can see the thickness from there that we're looking at. Yeah, that's pure HDPE. So we've been through the flip-floppy project, we've been able to push the boundaries as to what is possible to create with recycling of plastics. So estimates look like we need about $500,000 shillings to $500,000 to scale up over the next 5 years before we'd be able to be sustainable over time. And that's what success would look like. To give you an idea of what we're sort of looking at over the long haul. It is a long haul game. I wish it wasn't, but that is the nature of the beast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dipesh. Really incredible initiative. And the fact that you're also like constantly pushing the agenda, you know, UNEP and UN Habitat, and you know, really pushing for change. And as you say, you know, spotting those opportunities for real systemic change. I know that we have Mr. Rahman, who's the Chief Engineer from Select City Corporation. I think he's with us in the audience. So it might be interesting to find out whether whether Mr. Rahman sees any opportunities to deploy anything similar in select cities. Next up, we have Ishrat from the Amal Foundation. She's a project development manager. And they've been doing some work with the informal plastic waste economy. And in a recent report, the Pew report, stated that up to 60% of global plastics recycling is carried out by waste pickers and done in the informal sector. So this is very, very important sector to listen to. So
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen and let's see. Can we see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this entire presentation is going to be, we're trying to highlight how the entire informal waste collector process goes and how Bangladesh, despite trying to incorporate the circular economy, we are rapidly failing. And I'll try to highlight how so. So starting off, population in Bangladesh is expanding rapidly, and so is the consumption of goods and services. This development has rather given rise to a problem that we haven't quite handled efficiently. The rapid growth of industries, lack of financial resources, inadequate trained manpower, and inappropriate technology, and the lack of awareness of the community are the major constraints why solid waste management has been such a challenge for fast-growing cities of Bangladesh. And due to this limited finances and organizational capacity, it has been really difficult for the municipals to ensure efficient and appropriate delivery of solid waste collection and disposal of services to the entire population. These are the main reasons why refurbishing, the recycling, and the parts harvesting isn't properly being implemented and is hindering our contribution to the circular economy that we so really want to be a part of. If we were to look at the current household waste management process, it can simply be put into 3 steps. It's collection, sorting, and processing. And processing mainly entails recycling, conversion, and/or dumping in the landfills. The separation and the recycling contribute to the collection challenge by reducing the amount of waste or refuse to be collected. However, despite the demand for recyclables, large volumes of materials that could be of value to the recycling industry is still mixed with other waste and thus damaged or soiled and lose part of their initial value. Recycling such materials entails a time-consuming sorting and cleaning process whereby the material quality remains low grade, obtaining a lower price. This is the reason why a lot of materials that are not recycled and a large volume ends up discarded in dump sites or landfills. All resource recovery activities are salvaged informally in mainly 3 stages. In the first stage, the housewives separate the refuse of higher market value, such as paper bottles, fresh containers, plastic bottles, shampoo bottles, and sell them to the street hawkers. The second stage of salvaging is carried out by the waste pickers or scavengers. The scavengers act as a primary processor in the recycling process in major cities in Bangladesh. They collect the refuse and domestic waste of low market value from bins, containers, and sweeping accumulation centers. The third stage of the salvaging is done by the refuse pickers, when fresh refuse is unloaded by municipal collection vehicles at local disposable sites. As discussed, we can see the main unsung heroes of the entire process are really the informal waste pickers. They're involved in almost all the steps of the waste management process. It's not a favorable job, but so many children are engaged in this process. Solid waste management, recycling, and poverty are closely linked with one another. Waste management and waste picking provide jobs and support income and livelihood, although they have no social recognition. For an income as low as 0.35 pounds to as high as 1.45 pounds per day, they've been working tirelessly in risky and unhealthy environments. Waste picking is not an easy choice of profession, but it requires no skill and capital. Waste pickers enjoy the freedom of starting and ending work, and scavengers act as the primary processor in the recycling process of major cities, which are mostly found in slums and settlements, and even they live in footpaths. But the real question that lies here is, at what cost will they continue to do this? These informal waste collectors suffer from various physical ailments, and the ones that came up the most in our research was fever, respiratory problems, chronic bronchitis, headaches, poor emotional well-being, muscle pain, and many, many more. And as you can see, if we were to derive our problem analysis of this entire situation, we came down to 2 big problems. And number 1 is biological and chemical contamination of dirty and contaminated plastic waste, and dirty packaging and items giving rise to risk of biological contamination. Secondly, contaminated plastics and PET containers sometimes contain urine, detergents, chlorine, food rests, and separating the waste and facilitating an engagement with toxic substance and sharp materials often give risk of infection, allergies, and other respiratory diseases. Now, this has been our situation analysis and our problem analysis of the entire situation that's been happening here. And Amal Foundation has been trying to year after year, try to contribute and make the situation a little bit better for our informal waste collectors. Firstly, we have regular yearly health camps for waste collectors where they are given prescriptions and they are given doctor recommendations yearly basis, let's say in our grassroots levels in Dhaka cities, in cities where they often do not receive the care that they so desperately need. Secondly, we had relief distribution in chores. So to describe a little bit what are chores, these are the indigenous regions or the separated areas, island areas in the middle of grassroots levels where there's not enough infrastructure, there's not enough communication that reach there. So we had distribution of dry food packs and other important necessities that they needed for the people who were engaged in informal waste collection. Lastly, we had a trash tech challenge that took place all over Bangladesh, especially in Cox's Bazar, to universities, to street sides, and we engaged all the youth, the huge volunteer base that we have in collecting the waste from the streets, and to make people aware about how the plastics and trash is negatively affect our environment, and not just the informal waste speakers, but the people who are living all around in the cities. I guess with that, I would like to end the presentation, and thank you so much to everybody else. It was so informative, and I hope this presentation was a little bit informative and give you a little bit of insight about what's happening here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishrat. Really interesting and important work. And so we're actually slightly ahead of schedule at the moment. So perhaps we could have a look at a couple of questions. So one question that has come in from Naseem Taluktar, who is a member of the, hang on, let me get the acronym right, Plasticpollution Awareness and Action Project. Wondering what the impact of COVID will be on the circular economy as we shift towards, well, as we head towards a global recession by the looks of it. But, you know, is there an opportunity for systemic change at this point? Steve?
Hi, Cressida, thank you for that. I think, well, that's a really difficult question. It's a bit difficult to know, isn't it? So bodies like the International Resource Panel are really trying to present the Build Back Better agenda as an opportunity for transition and transformation. So rather than seeing the economic downturn as a existential challenge, to see it really as a huge opportunity to really build resource efficiency and decoupling into how national and subnational economies respond to the COVID crisis. And it kind of makes sense, I think, in a way, to think of it that way, because I suppose if we're looking to rebuild an economy that is more resilient, that is fairer, and that is really trying to overcome some of the challenges that the three presentations after mine really highlighted, then, you know, creating less pollution, using fewer resources, and retaining value in the economy seem to be really sensible building blocks to build back in a way that makes our economies better for the long term. I think I'll probably leave it there, Krista. I think I could just talk for ages about that without really saying very much more than that. So
yeah, thanks. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, COVID has demonstrated this kind of, you know, this global issue where there aren't any boundaries and we're all equally affected, rich or poor, you know, wherever we live, however big we think our protection mechanisms are. And it's exactly the same with climate change. And, you know, as we keep hearing, we're on the peak now, and, you know, we can go either way, really, seriously, with climate change. And there has to be, as you mentioned, a decoupling of, to my mind anyway, between GDP as a measure of success of humankind, a decoupling of that to something a bit more significant and hard to measure stuff, actually, like well-being and environmental health. But anyway, yes, I could. Now, please welcome Dr. Sharia Hussain from ESDO, which is an environmental and social development organisation in Bangladesh. And Sharia is the senior technical advisor, and he's going to tell us about their initiative to create zero waste cities in Bangladesh. So thanks, over to you, Dr. Hussain.
Thank you. Cressida. Good afternoon and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, environment and social development organizations working since 1990, and gradually as we started with the plastic bag banning, then we gradually moved to the zero waste. And it was in 2004, actually, we started the issue of zero waste, building cities and communities. And initially we started to build a zero waste village in northern Bangladesh. And that was some successful initiatives. We had developed 2 model village in northern part of Bangladesh. And that encouraged us to move forward for build zero waste city. And this year, actually, we started to the new project on zero waste cities and communities, and particularly that focus is to build a model communities in the cities, in township, and the village. So 3 locations we are now working. Zero waste, I know that you all are familiar with the zero waste principle, zero waste approach, and this is a holistic focus for reuse, reduction, recycle, and circular economy, strengthening the circular economy. So we move forward with this principle, and our project focus is completely with the 4 steps of initiatives. That is the theory of the project, change the refuse. And this is most important. The earlier presentation, many presentations focusing the plastic waste, problematic plastic recycling issues, and that focuses, and that we are thinking the problematic plastic and particularly the chemicals product. Plastic also is the chemical product, and the many chemical related products are around us in everyday lives, and we have to change our behaviors. We have to think about that. We have to refuse that and reduce the things that is most importantly the food waste. That is a big challenge for everyday life. Unnecessary shopping is we determine, and we see that the many people's we do shopping, and which is create a lot of the wastes, and particularly the packaging materials that we never think about. So we have to think about the reduction of this process, and reuse is the most important for our everyday life, and definitely for the recycling process. So these are the 4 principles of our zero waste initiatives, and that we are moving forward. And the project goal is to create ecologically and environmentally conscious rural and urban communities, and that to seek the appropriate waste management system. As you know that the waste management lies with the many things. And we believe that the source segregation is the key of the waste management. And that is the big challenges for our waste management. Whatever the countries, the developing country or developed country, the same issues arise. And ultimate goal of this project is to create a zero waste community. So now we are working on this project with the principle of the lesson learned that we have in the last 14 years of working on the zero waste initiatives. And just simple things that the theory, the lessons that we can start, the beginning of the initiatives that we are working now with the communities. So we are engaging the communities to work on. Let's start with the simple things. Let's start with the single things. That is the single-use plastic. If we can start with thinking that our lifestyle is not required for a plastic straw. So even though if we need the straw, there are a lot of alternatives around us. So we can think about the alternatives of single use, and that is most important, that we are working with the communities. Second things is adopt reusable things. And the most important, the bags, is the materials that we use, the plastic bag, but we can rethink to use the reusable, degradable bags that around us and that boost up our economy as well. The refilling system is most important. If we can refill our everyday commodities, if we can refill the products, the foods, grains, even the drinks every day, that could be help our process. The objectives to develop skills community, sustainable consumption and production, turning waste into the resource, that we focus on the SDG 12s. The project location, now we are implementing the project in the capital Dhaka, in the location of Lalmatia and northern district of Rangpur City Corporation, and in a village in the Rangpur. So these three locations is determine the behavior pattern of the people, the lifestyle of the people. And we think that if we could build this model in the three locations, that will be easier to replicate all over the country, even beyond the border. So these are the baseline recent, before we start. You can see the scenarios. The most important, the project implementation plan. We involve the communities, we involve and participate in the media, and this community will build the CVOs, consultative service providers, policy dialogue. So ultimately, this zero waste community will be self-reliance, and this will link up with the many related issues, and this will promote the small and medium enterprise as well. These are the awareness things that we are thinking that are in the process of the activities. And this is a quick, the interesting things that replicating the issues, replicating the model, and we are planning to showcasing the ideas, showcasing the issues of the communities that are zero waste. So the community will come up with their own ideas. Community will involve with the process of segregation from the source, and they will gather together with the community fair. And this community fair will encourage other people how the community is act to go for zero waste. Capacity building, one of the major part of this project. Environmental education is also the biggest thrust. Dissemination the information and ideas through the talk shows, social media campaign, one-to-one communication, network building, that also address in this project. This is an unique idea that we are going to introduce, the home composting. That means the source segregation and source reduction of the waste. So we promote in this project for household waste composting. So this picture, you can see that these are the composter. These are the naturally made pottery composter. And we already working on that, and community is very much interested. And this composter is now in the process of developing. And we hope that this will be quickly popular with every household in Dhaka city and around the country. Because this process is immediately help the people to handle their kitchen waste. So the kitchen waste is no need to send to the garbage bin. Kitchen waste to turn to the compost, and it could be the fertilizer for your backyard, even rooftop gardening, and other process. And this is an integrated plan that we have to do. And the large community, the community can generate their compost, and they can sell it within the communities. So these are also encouraging the entrepreneurship building. So this project is also focusing on the 4 type of bins in the every household. Actually, this is the idea we have already shared with the city corporation, Dhaka North City Corporation and South City Corporation. And we are now closely working to introduce this kind of bin, hopefully beginning of the next year. This is a unique approach that we introduce for the collection van. The traditional collection van, we know that this is not properly managed, properly segregated the waste. So this van is an idea for the 4 bin, 4 color. This is now 1 color, but this will be the 4 colors and segregated from the source. And that will help to the waste collector and waste picker in a proper manner and send it to the municipal temporary collection and storage system. And that also plan to introduce the similar kind of container in the source, in the temporary collection center. And we are trying to link up with the small and medium entrepreneurs and the recyclers to collect the waste from the municipal temporary stations. So this process is going on. We are now closely working with Dhaka North City Corporation and Rangpur City Corporation to introduce this idea. So these are the quick action plans of our project. And within the next 1.5 years, this project will build 3 model community. And we believe that that will be the most lesson learned and practical showcasing activities in Bangladesh, and not only Bangladesh, and this will help to other countries around the world. These are the quick pictographics of our activities, and the top left corner, our team with the mayor of Rangpur City Corporation, and the middle, this is a survey, and the right corner, the mayor of Dhaka North City Corporation, and the bottom is this is a backyard composter. This is particularly for the rural communities, and this composter will help to manage the kitchen waste and organic waste, and this will create the composter. That is, you can see this here, the compost. And we have already prepared some of the awareness materials in relation with the waste segregation, waste composting, identify the waste and how to handle the waste, everyday life. And finally, this is, we feel, and thanks.